Hello, gathered friends. I'm Nuva, and welcome to Bionicle Deep Dive, where we analyze the tropes, characters, and lore of LEGO Bionicle. Happy Bionicle Day, everybody! It's the 20th anniversary of the 2004 Metru Nui arc, and in honor of that, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into how the theme of time permeates this whole arc. From the framing of this arc as a story of the past told in the present, to the characters' personal feelings towards the past, present, and future, to the way this arc forever changed our perspective on the history of the Bionicle world, and of course the legendary Mask of Time itself. It's fascinating how ever-present the notion of time weaves this entire story together. Let's dive right into it. First and foremost, this arc is a prequel, framed as the Turaga telling their history to the Toanuva. That already gives us an interesting perspective of time, since we're constantly aware that the events we're seeing are in the distant past, and the contrast between how things were back then to how they are now. This plays into the dramatic irony that's at the core of this arc, the fact that we, the audience, know how the story eventually ends, with the Toa Metru becoming the Turaga and the Matoran leaving Metru Nui and living on Motunui. But we don't know how or why they got there, or how the Toa Metru, who were very different in their youth, become the wise elders we had gotten to know. And since this arc is explicitly framed as the Turaga telling these tales to the Toanuva, this keeps the Toanuva in their traditional spot as audience surrogates, since from the very beginning of Bionicle, they learned about their world at the same time we did, which I find really nice. This is handled well, especially in the novels, where each novel begins with a prologue in the present, with the Turaga and the Toanuva talking and preparing for this new tale. The main chapters in the middle all being written in omniscient third-person perspective, where the adventures in Metru Nui are treated as the present, and then an epilogue in the end, where the Toa talk about what they learned and how it affected them. And what I love about this framing device is how it ironically added to the suspense of the story, which feels strange to say for a prequel with a known ending to have suspense, but it really did. All throughout the early Metru Nui arc, there's this sense of impending doom, of time running out for some unknown disaster. In the prologue and epilogue of each novel that takes place before the Cataclysm, the Toanuva question Vakama of what great disaster he seems to be building towards that forced the Matoran to leave their home and come to Motunui. In the movie, Likan warns Vakama that time is short, and in the comics and movie, the false Duma cryptically warns that the time is drawing near. And we see the motif of time running out visually as well, with the imagery of the sundials moving and clicking throughout the movie, counting down to the Cataclysm, though at first we didn't know what that was. And of course, towards the end, as the Toa Metru race towards the Colosseum, Nokama sees the arc of the moons preparing to overlap the suns and says they don't have much time left, while the narration says that little did she know time had already run out. Again, we the audience don't know what's going to happen, but we know it must be something terrible. We're forced to see the ironic juxtaposition between the high-tech, prosperous society the Matoran had in the past, compared to their low-tech, besieged life on Motunui, and wonder what could have happened to cause them to fall so far. And that constant awareness of massive change fuels a very rich motif surrounding ideas of time and change. And I've got to say that a lot of this is elevated by Greg Varsty's writing, particularly in the novelization of Legends of Metru Nui. I think Greg honestly needs more appreciation for his ability to evoke atmosphere with his words. It's just great. Reread the novel, trust me. And then, of course, it finally happens. Makuta reveals his plan, the Great Cataclysm arrives, and we finally understand what happened. That this was the moment when Motunui was cast into endless sleep. The mythological origin story for the entire Bionicle story. This is it. That distant past, the time before time, was now. For them. They saw it happen. And it's funny because we were never actually told if the Metru Nui arc took place before or after Motunui's fall until this moment. But now it becomes clear that this is what drove the Matoran away from their homes. And as for the Tohometru themselves, the fact that this is a story that they're telling about their own past highlights something that I've always found fascinating about their writing, and it's that these are characters that we were introduced to at the end of their arc. When we first meet them, it's as the Turaga of Metru Nui, the wise mentors to a different set of heroes. They're full of wisdom that came from their own time as heroes, from the struggles and character development that they went through ages ago. When we meet them, the character arcs that shaped them are already behind them, and they're at their most fully realized. We see them at the end, and then flash back to the beginning, to their origins as Matoran who freshly became Toa, and so now the story is really about their journey of how they got from there to here. And throughout, the Toa constantly reference their old lives and jobs as Matoran, making it clear that one of the central themes of this story is the transition from one phase of life to the next. It's a bit of a coming-of-age story. Everything is changing for them, and they're forced to grow up fast and learn a lot of lessons that they didn't have to in their previous sheltered lives. Honestly, the best direct comparison from another story I can think of would be Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars. In the original trilogy, we see Obi-Wan as this wise older mentor to Luke, who's clearly been through a lot in his life, but there's a lot of mystery to how he gained his wisdom. And then we see the prequel movies. We flash back to a young Obi-Wan who's only just finished his training. He's far different, more impulsive, and has a lot to learn. And throughout the stories of the prequels and other stories set in that time, we trace the journey of how he became who he was in the original. But even more than just the comparison of who they were in the past and who they are in the present, a lot of the important arcs and themes for the Tohometru's characters center around the theme of time and their relationship to it. Honestly, each of the Tohometru has something to say about time. Let's start with Vakama. Now, Vakama's ties to the theme of time are the most obvious, with his visions of the future, and also his creation of the Mask of Time, but they also go deeper in very interesting and subtle ways. All his life, but particularly during his time as a Toa, Vakama was plagued by visions. He would seemingly at random have his mind assaulted with often terrifying but always accurate premonitions that served to guide him and his team in the direction they needed to go, or prepare them for what was coming next. We're never told exactly where these visions come from, though there's plenty of interesting fan theories. Many headcanon that his visions are the result of his connection to the Mask of Time. Now, I personally enjoyed the idea that his visions were messages from the Great Spirit trying to guide the Tohometru on their quest. But either way, the purpose that they serve in the story is to push him towards the future that he has to go to. For many of the visions, particularly the ones that showed the destruction of Metru Nui, he believed that they were to help him prevent those outcomes. He wanted to stop that future from coming. But in reality, they were to prepare him for what comes next, to prepare the Tohometru for to do what it takes to protect the Matoran even after the fall of the city. And in a strange way, this thematically ties into his struggles with insecurity in being a Toa. In The Darkness Below, there's a moment where the Toa muse about what they will do now that they've become heroes, and each of them finds some part of it they look forward to, except for Vakama, who was always the least comfortable with the transformation, and admits that he would happily go back to being a Matoran. He never wanted to be a Toa. He didn't choose this for himself. He was chosen, and he was thrust into a role he didn't believe he could handle. Deep down, he wants to return to a simpler life, but he can't go back to the past. And so, with both his transformation and his visions, Vakama is literally being thrust into the future, and it scares him. All he wants to do is to go back, but he has to learn to embrace the strange new present and prepare to do what it takes to build a better future. And we see this with him as a Turaga later on, that he learns to become a balanced mix of decisive and careful, embracing the future while still approaching it responsibly. Now, Bakama isn't the only Tometsu to have his character arc revolve around themes of time. One of the major dynamics on the team was between Whenua and Nuju, who were constantly engaging in philosophical debates about the past and the future, with each of them thinking the way they do because of the different roles and cultures of their Metru. Whenua believes the past holds all the answers because his whole life had been dedicated to the archives and to history, while Nuju believes the only correct way to think is to be constantly thinking ahead and trying to predict the future, because his life's work was in the knowledge towers and studying prophecy. And Onawa also fits into this dynamic, particularly when they were trapped together. While Whenua is focused on the past and Nuju on the future, Onawa is focused on the present. He believes that the others spend too much time in their heads and thinks Pomatoran culture, which emphasizes the concrete here and now, is the best. And a major component of each of their arcs is how they each needed to learn to appreciate each other and appreciate time more holistically, which was part of the lesson Taragali Khan was trying to teach them while giving them exercises to learn their mask powers. And I'd argue this was represented the best in the novel. Whenua's task was to navigate around the room with a blindfold on, and with his belief that the past holds all the answers, he went about it by trying to memorize the layout of the room. But in the novel, Likon quietly slides a stool in Whenua's path to make him trip. And it drives home the idea that the present isn't always going to look like the past, and that he has to learn to not be caught off guard by situations that are new. And although frustrated by this at first, Whenua does go on to internalize this lesson not long after. When they escape their cell and enter the tunnels, Nuju remarks that all that lies ahead is shadow, but Whenua responds that it has to be better than what's behind us, activating his mask for the first time, proclaiming that their future just got a whole lot brighter. This exchange shows that Whenua is beginning to look more to the future, and no longer limiting his perspective to what's behind him. And eventually this culminates in the Whenua we see as a Turaga, who still has a heavy respect for history, but was also renowned for his ability to think ahead and foresee problems days before they occur. And on the flip side, we have Nuju, who is always thinking about the future, trying to predict what happens next, and dismissing anything he felt wouldn't give him insight into that. Ironically, his desire to continue studying the future left him stuck in the past to a degree, as he'd even once hoped that after the defeat of the Morbuzak, the Tometsu would be able to return back into Matoran, and he could return to his work. And when trapped in the cell and unable to see a future out, Nuju began to give in to despair. Nuju's task was to carry rocks from one pile to the next, a task that he couldn't see giving him any knowledge of the future. But Likon reminded him that the lesson to learn was for today, and to learn to appreciate the present and the small, hard steps that need to be done in the here and now in order to build a future. Nuju begins to take this to heart, as he begins to see the flaws in only looking ahead. And by the end of his character journey, his respect for the past is so great that one of the motivations he has for choosing to only speak in the language of Flying Rahi was so that every word he speaks is a reminder to both himself and the other Turaga of their past and the dangers of arrogance. And then there's Onawa, who ended up rounding out the trapped Tometsu trio by being focused on the present, thinking that things in the distant past or unknown future were a waste of time compared to what was physically in front of them. This is part of the reason he was so abrasive with Vakama. He couldn't see the visions as anything other than delusions. That unwillingness to empathize with other viewpoints is why Likon gave him the task of helping both Whenua and Nuju, taking stones from one pile to another, but doing it blindfolded. Forced into a situation that was doubly uncomfortable for him, let him begin to understand and feel for his teammates more, becoming less dismissive and gaining a more balanced view of past and future, leading to him being renowned as a very fair Turaga in his later days. Now, the last two Metru, Matao and Nokama, have less explicit arcs in relation to time, though they still have interesting dynamics to how their characters view the past, present, and future. Now, with Matao, his relationship to time emphasizes the fact that in the beginning, Matao was constantly fantasizing about an ideal, glorious future for the Metru. The thing he wanted the most in the world was praise and admiration for being a hero, and spent a lot of time openly daydreaming about his perfect future. His desire to live up to his idea of what a hero should be caused him to be reckless, hoping that by always choosing the most daring option, he would become a legend. Because of that, a major part of his arc was coming to terms with the hard and grounded life of Atoa, accepting that to make a real future worth having, he was going to have to be careful and accept the hard, inglorious work it takes to build it, leading to him becoming a much more humble and relaxed as a Turaga, traits that earned him tremendous loyalty. Now, Nokama, I would say, had the least definitive motif relating her to time, but its themes still play in her character arc. She probably had the most balanced view of time as a Toa, appreciating both the past and future and doing her best to make sense of the present. She was one of the most nostalgic Toa about her former life, expressing regret that her friends now see her as different, but also sadly noting during the Great Cataclysm that she had once believed Metru Nui would stand forever. But honestly, where the themes of time play out most interesting is actually during her time as a Turaga. She was one of the fiercest advocates for telling the Toa Nuva early, and even showed Gali a carving of the Toa Metru behind the other Turaga's back. She couldn't stand not telling lies to the Toa about the past, believing they were owed honesty. And later on, she would have the same feelings about keeping the future from the Matoran, when she defied Duma's orders and revealed the truth about the prophecy of Matanui's death to Jaller. Ultimately, Nokama's relationship to time is about her relationship to the truth, that the past and future should not be withheld from those they care about. And that truth coming out plays so interestingly, because along with the themes of the inevitability of the future, this story also reckons with the undeniability of the past. The Turaga kept this history secret from their people for centuries, and avoided telling the Toa until it was forced to come to light. While they always knew this day would come, they dreaded it. As a Turaga, Wanu would often say, "It serves no purpose to be false, for the earth cannot be deceived." And within the context of their backstory, I always took this as a subtle reference to Metru Nui, that it doesn't matter what we say, the truth of Metru Nui and the earth beneath our feet cannot be denied. Okay, so with all this talk of time, I think it's time to talk about the legendary elephant in the room, the Kanohivahi, the Mask of Time. 2004 gave us the origin story for this mask that was introduced the year before in Borakal arc. That it was created by Vakama from the Great Discs during the Great Cataclysm. While in canon the mask didn't grant time travel, it allowed the user to speed up or slow down time, and was implied to be capable of doing it on a cosmic scale. And, it's funny that with all I've been talking about the thematic significance of time throughout this arc, the Vahi itself honestly feels a little out of place. I feel like it just doesn't connect as richly to the other themes of time present in this arc. It's hyped up as this huge important plot point, a major key in Makuta's plan, the most powerful mask ever created, with the power to control reality itself. But in the end, it doesn't really do very much during the climax. Vakami uses it once to try and slow down Makuta, bails, and gets Likon killed, and the mask gets lost to the sea before they go back to fighting. Now, it was a great scene, don't get me wrong, but ultimately the Vahi doesn't really end up shaping the course of the finale. It could probably be removed and the story could remain the same. Now, I know I'm not the only one in the fandom who feels the Vahi was underutilized in the story. It was only ever used twice, and both times all it really did was slow down time so the heroes could come up with a different plan. And the other story that it appears in, Time Trap, is more about the Vahi as a MacGuffin, something that's too dangerous to be let fall into evil's hands, but is also too dangerous to use. And in an interesting way, that's kind of always been the point. The Vahi was never meant to be used except in the most desperate of cases. It was a power too great for anyone to wield. Even in Christian Faber's Well of Time concept art, the Mask of Time is described as the mask that must never be used. So, its very limited uses do really work with the themes around the mask, and that's something that I enjoyed. But I can't help but wonder, what if there's a way to integrate the Vahi a little bit better into the story of Legends of Metru Nui, while still preserving those other themes around it? And I think I found a way, if you'll permit me a little bit of fix-it fanfic. Now, Vakama remarks in the novelization that he had an unexplained strong feeling that this mask would be vital in saving the city. Shame it ended up being wrong. But what if he had acted on that feeling? Ultimately, much would stay the same, but what if instead of using it to stall Makuta at the Great Barrier, Vakama tried to use the Vahi in a different, larger scope way? What if he tried to use it to stop the Cataclysm? One of the best visual motifs in Legend of Metru Nui is the slowly ticking sundials and the coming eclipse. These very interesting visual foreshadowing of what is to come with the Great Cataclysm, that the coming shadow is inevitable. What if, in the moments before the double eclipse, Vakama dons the mask to use on a grand scale worthy of a legendary Kanohi, attempting to stop time on a cosmic scale to prevent the Cataclysm? He'd reach up and extend its power to the heavens, slowing down the movement of the moons themselves in a desperate attempt to stop the coming darkness, straining with all his might to keep the eyes of God from closing by making time itself stop. After all, this must be why they were chosen to become Toa, right? To prevent the coming catastrophe. And this would be so fitting because it hits an important core of Vakama's character struggle. He doesn't want the future. He wants to stop it from coming. He wants to go back to his old life because he's afraid he can't handle the future. Maybe he thinks to himself, if he can master this power, he can not only stop the Cataclysm, but go back. Or perhaps even after the Cataclysm hits, he's tempted to use the mask to reverse the damage by trying to reverse time, to go back to the past. But it wouldn't be enough. It could never have been enough, because the events that led to the Cataclysm have been in motion far longer than he could have known. It was already inevitable. Time had already run out. The robot was already falling from orbit. And he has to accept a crushing truth. He wasn't made to stop the Cataclysm. The Toa weren't there to save the city. They were there to save its heart, the Matoran. For all the power of the mask, no one could stop the future from coming. But they could make it better. And that's the message of the movie, bringing hope to the future. And it ties in nicely to part of Vakama's arc in Time Trap later on, because a major section of that story deals with Vakama believing that he had somehow been sent back to when he was a Matoran. And for a lot of his time as a Toa, this would have been the best thing ever for him. He would have loved this. But after going through all he had been through, and after maturing and accepting and understanding his role as a hero and the passage of time, he grew to know that no, being sent back, it's not a paradise, it's not the truth. This theme of Vakama wanting to use the mask to slow down or stop the cataclysm, also forms an amazing foil to Makuta and Makuta's motivations for getting the mask. It's because Makuta wanted the Vahi to speed up time, so he could fast forward to the future where the Matorn's minds would be wiped and he'd be able to control precisely when the other events of his plans would take place. But, in the end, both the hero and villain would be forced to accept that they can't control time. They cannot prevent the future, nor can they force it to arrive on their own schedule. They must brave the uncertainty of a lifetime's journey to find their destinies. And I think that's beautiful. And Wakame using the mask like this would make for such a grand moment, not only for the mask, but also for his character arc, while still keeping most of the rest of the story the same, since it would still fail in the end, and they would have to find a way to leave Metru Nui. But that's just my own ideas on a version of the story that uses the mask. I'd love to hear other people's ideas on ways to tell this story that feel compelling to them. Now, the themes of time being so present in this story is also super interesting because, in a meta way, the Metru Nui arc ultimately serves the purpose of grounding the entire Bionicle saga in time, and really giving the audience the sense that there was an actual history for this universe. What I mean is that before 2004, Bionicle didn't really have a defined or concrete sense of history or a real timeline. Everything was floating in a much more nebulous present because there were no definitive markers of what came before, before the Toa arrived. Sure, we knew that the legend that ages ago in the time before time, Matanui was cast into endless sleep, and the Matorn had been living in fear until the Toa arrived. But we had no idea how long ago that was or what life was like before then. There was a heavy atmosphere of implied history, given how many ancient mysteries there were, but never anything to make the past of the island feel grounded. And that was okay, because the stories they were trying to tell in the 2001 and 2003 arcs didn't need those things to work, and I might argue worked better, because they allowed the past of the island to remain very mysterious and mythic and atmospheric. But as Bionicle was expanding into a new era and preparing to eventually give answers to the mysteries it had been setting up, it needed to give the world a real history to take place in, and the Metru Nui arc served that well. There was a generation of Toa before the Metru with Likon, and clearly a generation before him with Taragaduma, and who knows how many before that. And even at this point, we didn't know the specifics about the 100,000-year history or even the name of the Toa Mangai, but we now had a grasp that this was the story of a world with a rich history, and of heroes that passed the spark of hope from one generation to another. And in a way, it also made us feel like there was a future to this world too, in addition to the past. Now the heroes had a more concrete goal for what their future would look like, aside from the vague overarching goal of reawakening Matanui. Now they knew that their future would be rebuilding Metru Nui and returning the Matorn to their home. And now we, the audience, had it in our mind that there could also be future generations of Toa that come after the Toa Nuva. And I remember wondering and speculating if there were any Matorn we knew who would become Toa, some of whom did later on. And that meant that what the Toa did now would shape the world of those future heroes. No longer was Bionicle set in a floating, constant present. Now we had a real sense that this was a specific period of time for this world and these people, and that things came before and would come after. Remembering deeds past and bringing hope to the future. And hopefully, that's what we're doing today, Bionicle Day. Remembering this legend that brought us joy, and keeping the inspiration alive for new legends to come. For that is the way of the Bionicle. Let me know what you guys think about this look into the themes of time in the Metru Nui arc, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care, my gathered friends.